After taking a 30-point loss to the Utah Jazz, the Sacramento Kings have now lost 14 games in a row, and they firmly hold the worst record in the entire NBA, 12-44, worse than the Pelicans, the Jazz, the Wizards, the Nets, the Pacers, all the tanking teams you can think of. The Sacramento Kings are somehow worse, and by a long shot, with a roster that I believe was constructed in the offseason with the intent of actually winning some games. That just hasn't been the case this season, and the Kings are the worst team in basketball now. So like I was saying, the Kings in the offseason looked like a team that could maybe compete for a play-in spot in the Western Conference. Coming into the season, really, I don't think anybody would have bet on them to be the official worst team in the entire NBA. Maybe you would just because it's the Kings and we all expect the Kings to suck because they're the Kings, but this roster at face value is truly not 12-44 bad, and there are good players littered across this team. For starters, you have Domantas Sabonis, one of the best big men in the NBA, the best rebounder in all of basketball last season. He's only played 19 games, and in those 19 games, he hasn't looked like the Sabonis that we're used to. He's averaging 16 points on 54% shooting from the field, which is a 5% decrease from last year, along with 11 rebounds and 4 assists. Now, I'm not going to blame Domantas Sabonis for necessarily playing bad or blame the Kings' struggles on Sabonis. This is just one of those teams that make players look worse than they actually are. I don't think Sabonis is washed. I don't think his best basketball is behind him. I just don't think he's getting fed the ball in advantageous situations and getting the opportunity to run the offense in ways that he did when De'Aaron Fox was on the team. He's no longer at the top of the key setting up the action for his teammates. He's taken a backseat in the team's offense as far as handling the ball and playmaking is concerned. Instead, that job was in the hands of Dennis Schroeder, Malik Monk, DeMar DeRozan, guys that are really only best at creating their own shot, not necessarily being the funnel for a team offense. Now, that's not to say I want Sabonis taking the ball up the court for this team and playing the point guard spot, but I think there are definitely ways that he could be better utilized to help this team out that they just aren't doing offensively. And with the Kings, it's hard to tell if it's a coaching problem or if they're just trying to tank flat out and don't really care to be any better offensively, but this team just looks like a total disaster on the floor. And it's not just limited to Sabonis either, by the way. Like I said, this is just one of those rosters that makes every player on it look worse than they actually are. And that's because this team was not built with a clear vision in mind. Let's stop and think for a second. If the two most expensive players on my roster are Zach Lavine and Domantas Sabonis, one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA in Zach Lavine, an overall efficient shooter from all three levels, and Domantas Sabonis, one of the best rebounders and under-the-basket scorers we have in the NBA, but two guys that are not necessarily good on defense. You get the most out of your two best players on the offensive side of the ball. So what would I do? I would build the rest of the starting lineup and the bench with more defensive-oriented players to help out my more offensive-oriented stars. But what did the Kings do? They paid DeMar DeRozan $25 million a season, did not trade him in the offseason or at the trade deadline, when that's probably going to be the last time you can ever get value out of a DeMar DeRozan trade. You're likely just going to have to dump him in the offseason. And Keon Ellis, one of your best perimeter defenders, you gave no minutes and then traded him for nothing. We'll get into that trade a little bit later. You also have Malik Monk, who was not a defender whatsoever. You're also not helping him out with his offensive ability because there's little to no floor spacing on this team. And Russell Westbrook, who was still a good defender at the age of 36, 37 years old, but he still wouldn't be my choice for a starting point guard in 2026, especially not on this Kings team. Now, with that being said, Russ has far outplayed his expectations this year. Him signing with the Kings was almost like a meme. Everyone expected the worst for Russ in Sacramento, and I did too, I'm not gonna lie. But Russ has actually been incredible this season, averaging 15 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 assists on the year, while completely turning around his game offensively, shooting the three ball at a very high clip. This is another guy on this team that you should have gotten value for at the trade deadline. I refuse to believe there wasn't a single taker for either Zach Lavine, DeMar DeRozan, Domantas Sabonis, Russell Westbrook, or Malik Monk. I don't believe that. It did not take very long for us to figure out that the Kings were one of, if not the worst team in basketball, and I don't think it took the front office very long either, because there was some talk a few months back about Domantas Sabonis and the Kings front office kind of coming together for a meeting to discuss what's next for both parties, and I don't think that type of meeting happens if this team is on a roll. goal. And judging by the way this team has played over the last 14 games, losing 14 straight, benching their starters in the fourth quarter in the Clippers game, this team knows they suck and they are trying to lose games in order to get that maybe top 3 to 1 pick in the draft. And usually when teams like this suck and they know they're bad and they want to get the first overall pick and they know they're not going anywhere with this current iteration of roster, they try to sell off their pieces at the deadline. And the Kings had some interesting trade pieces on this roster like Domantas Sabonis, Dennis Schroeder, Malik Monk, Keon Ellis. And knowing this, the Kings leave the trade deadline having only made one trade, or actually two, because they traded Dario Saric to the Pistons, I believe, but we're not counting that. The Sacramento Kings trade Keon Ellis and Dennis Schroeder to the Cleveland Cavaliers for DeAndre Hunter. I hated this trade when it happened, and I think a week later I hate it more. Now obviously with Malik Monk, Dennis Schroeder, Zach Lavine, Russell Westbrook, Devin Carter, there were plenty of guards on this roster that they just straight up did not need, so they headed into the trade deadline looking to deal at least one or two of them. And with this being the worst team in basketball, you'd think in a trade you'd look to get back maybe some draft picks, younger players, or players that just fit your roster construction a little bit better. By trading Keon Ellis and Dennis Schroeder for DeAndre Hunter, you didn't get younger, you didn't get any draft picks, and you didn't get a player that fit this roster any better than those two guys did. You're adding DeAndre Hunter to a starting lineup that has DeMar DeRozan and Keegan Murray in it, so at least one of those three guys has to come off the bench. And DeAndre Hunter is already 28 years old coming out of that 2018 draft. I think he spent 3-4 years in college, so he's already a bit of an older player, a guy that's already established in his ways, probably not going to change all too much throughout the rest of his career. You trade Keon Ellis, who was one of the more intriguing trade pieces on the market, and Dennis Schroeder, a guy who's been a solid backup point guard over the last decade, for DeAndre Hunter, a guy you can't really build with, and a guy you can't even start right now, and 0 draft picks. I hated that trade. I hate it right now. And that move wouldn't even seem all too bad if they maybe moved on from a Zach Lavine or a DeMar DeRozan, but they didn't. DeMar DeRozan is 36 years old, probably playing the last few years of decent basketball he has left in him, and you don't trade him at the deadline. You're the worst team in the NBA. Now maybe I'm overvaluing this Kings roster. Maybe there was legitimately no takers for either DeMar DeRozan, Zach Lavine, or Domantas Sabonis, because truth be told, all three of them are overpaid for what they are at this point in their careers. But I think the reason I was so disappointed by the Kings trade deadline is because I expected to see the beginnings of a new era in Sacramento. The Kings have been in the rebuild stages for like the last 20 years now. They finally got a sniff of the playoffs in 2023, but after trading De'Aaron Fox, I think they had a bit of a false sense of a reality, thinking that they could get back to the playoffs or at least the play-in in the West without De'Aaron Fox and with Zach Lavine, who they traded De'Aaron Fox for. That was never going to happen, and it damn sure didn't happen this season. And I think a year later we can look back on that De'Aaron Fox trade, and even though it didn't look that great for the Kings at the time, it still looks bad for the Kings. That was a terrible trade. Trading De'Aaron Fox, arguably one of the best players in your entire franchise's history, for Zach Lavine, who's arguably on the worst contract in the entire NBA, and only 2 first-round picks, is just such a bad move. It's crazy to think how at one point in time this team had a Tyrese Halliburton, De'Aaron Fox backcourt and traded both of them without really getting anything insane in return. I guess I was okay with the Halliburton Sabonis trade at the time because the Kings did make the playoffs. That was their entire goal. But De'Aaron Fox for Zach Lavine, that one I actually can't support that. I really can't. That's a bad move. But enough about the negatives. I've been very negative in this video. I want to talk about how the Sacramento Kings can move forward and be saved as a team. I really don't think they're that far off from being an exciting young rebuilding team, which they should lean into that direction, especially being the worst team in the NBA. You're going to have the highest odds for the #1 overall pick. If you can add a AJ DeBanza or a Darren Peterson in the draft, that completely changes everything for this franchise. If you can land the #1 or #2 overall pick, then we're not thinking about, oh man, the De'Aaron Fox trade doesn't look good, or oh man, you still have DeMar DeRozan and Zach Lavine on this team. We're thinking we have a legit 1A young star to build around for the future, one that the Kings do not have right now. Although Maxime Reynard, who the Kings selected in the second round, looks really solid. He's having a great rookie season, averaging 10 points and 6 rebounds. And Nick Clifford, who they also drafted, hasn't looked great shooting the ball, but he's got the build and the profile to play play some solid defense and could be a rotational player for this team next season. You also still have Keegan Murray, who was your top 4 pick a few years ago, and he's developed into a really solid player. One of the better wing defenders in the NBA, very consistent and reliable on that side of the ball. However, offensively, he's yet to stay consistent and show who he really is as far as shooting the ball goes. This season, he's shooting 27% from 3, which is a 7% decrease from last year and a 14% decrease from his rookie season, in which he shot 41% from 3. I know we all remember Keegan Murray's rookie season where he was lights out shooting the ball, breaking NBA records, looked like a legit potential star. That's just not necessarily a thing anymore. His shooting has gradually slipped every single year since then, and it's hard to tell if it's a roster construction problem, because with Demar Derozan and Domantas Sabonis, guys that you're sharing the floor consistently with that aren't great three-point shooters, the floor spacing is a bit of a mess on this team. You're not getting very many open three-point looks. Maybe that's the sole reason why Keegan Murray has slipped in his percentages, or maybe he's just not the shooter that he showed he was in his rookie season, and we're not seeing that ever again. But after giving him a 5-year, $140 million contract, as good as he is defensively, you would still really like to see that three-point percentage rise, because that's his role on offense. Nobody's asking Keegan Murray to handle the ball and take it into the post. We're literally just asking him to make the spot three-point shot, and that's something he can't do anymore, which is a bit concerning. But like I said, the floor spacing on this team is already a mess. There's not a consistent lead ball handler playmaker for this team either, so it's not like anybody's helping Keegan Murray get any open looks, but at the same time, you still want to see him play better. And as far as young talent goes on this roster, that's about all there is to that. Devin Carter is on this team and is only 23 years old, but I don't think he's ever gonna be, how do I say this without being a dick, a smaller point guard that can't shoot and doesn't really do anything special on the offensive side of the ball, and can't guard anybody that's taller than 6'4", 6'5", I don't think really has a place in the NBA. Yet the Kings drafted him in the lottery, so that's the most Kings move ever. Shout out to Devin Carter. He's been okay this year, but I don't see him even being on this roster a year or two from now. So what's next for the Sacramento Kings? What should the fans be looking forward to in the future? What should the Kings do in the offseason? Now that is a loaded question, because when you look at how this team has performed this season, the Kings are the 3rd worst defense in all of basketball and the 2nd worst offense in all of basketball. So quite frankly, this team does nothing well. There's nothing you'd be sacrificing in order to go towards a rebuild. You're already terrible. So Kings fans should be excited about the upcoming draft lottery, when this team will likely still be the worst team in the NBA by the end of the year, and you will have the #1 odds at a AJ Debance, Darren Peterson, which would change everything for the Kings. And there's almost nobody on this team that you have a long-term commitment to outside of Domantas Sabonis and Keegan Murray. So you have all the freedom in the world to go any which way you can with this roster, whether that's trading for your next star point guard, maybe a Ja Morant, maybe a LaMelo Ball, I don't know. I'm just throwing names out there because there have been rumors over the last few months that obviously after trading De'Aaron Fox for Zach Lavine, this team is without a playmaker and a starting point guard, and if they can't get one in the draft, they would like to get one on the trade market, which I think could be an interesting route to go. Imagine the Kings next year with a Ja Morant, an AJ Debance, and Domantas Sabonis. I don't know, I tried to hype that up in my head, but when it came out, it didn't sound that dangerous. But truth be told, regardless of all the negativity I've spewed, regardless of everything I've said about the Kings in this video, I am very proud of the Sacramento Kings this year, because this year they fully took on the identity of a tanking team, a team that does not want to win basketball games. We want to compete only in the draft lottery, not in the regular season, and that's something the Kings haven't done in a while since they added Domantas Sabonis to this team. The Kings were a top 3 seed in 2023, then we're a 9th seed, then we're a 10th seed, and now we're finally back at the bottom at the 15th seed, which is honestly great for the franchise. I would love to see them get the #1 overall pick and blow this whole thing up in the offseason and start fresh, because we've seen the Kings play 56 basketball games this year and they've only lit the beam 12 times, which is not a good look at all for Demar Derozan and Russell Westbrook's PR team. But anyways, that's gonna wrap it up. If you guys did enjoy this video, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. I'm a small channel just trying to grow, but that's gonna do it for me. I hope to catch you guys in another video soon. Until then, I'm out. Deuces.